Mr. President, you've just come from making a speech at celebrating a nonviolent event, the March on Washington, Martin Luther King speech 50 years ago. We're going to get to that in just a moment. But first, we want to ask you about a place where there's been too much violence, Syria. How close are you to authorizing a military strike? And can you assure the American people that by doing so, given Iraq and Afghanistan, that the United States will not get bogged down in yet another war halfway around the world?
Well, first of all, I have not made a decision. I have gotten options from our military. I had extensive discussions with my national security team. So let me talk about what's at stake here. I think we all understand terrible things have been happening in Syria for quite some time, that the Assad regime there has been killing its own people by the tens of thousands, that there are sectarian arguments that have spilled over into bloodshed and have escalated over the last couple of years. And although what's happened there is tragic, and although I have called for Assad to leave and make sure that we've got a transitional government that could be inclusive in Syria, what I've also concluded is that direct military engagement, involvement in a civil war in Syria would not help the situation on the ground. And so we've been very restrained. Although diplomatically, we've been very active. We've been providing a lot of humanitarian aid to people who've been displaced by the war. But what I also said was that if the Assad regime used chemical weapons on his own people, that would change some of our calculations. And the reason has to do with not only international norms, but also America's core self-interest. We've got a situation in which you've got a well-established international norm against the use of chemical weapons. Syria has one of the largest stockpiles in the world of chemical weapons. This is a volatile country in a very volatile region. We've got allies bordering Syria. Turkey is a NATO ally. Jordan, a close friend that we work with a lot. Israel is very close by. We've got bases throughout the region. We cannot see a breach of the non-proliferation norm that allows potentially chemical weapons to fall into the hands of all kinds of folks. So what I've said is that we have not yet made a decision, but the international norm against the use of chemical weapons needs to be kept in place, and nobody disputes, or hardly anybody disputes, that chemical weapons were used on a large scale in Syria against civilian populations. We have looked at all the evidence, and we do not believe the opposition possessed nuclear weapons of that, or chemical weapons of that sort. We do not believe that, given the delivery systems using rockets, that the opposition could have carried out these attacks. We have concluded that the Syrian government, in fact, carried these out, and if that's so, then there need to be international consequences. So we are consulting with our allies, we're consulting with the international community, and I have no interest in any kind of open-ended conflict in Syria, but we do have to make sure that when countries break international norms on weapons like chemical weapons that could threaten us, that they are held accountable.
But, Mr. President, with all due respect, what does it accomplish? I mean, the signals the American people are getting is that this would be a limited strike over limited duration. If it's not going to do that much harm to the Assad regime, what have you accomplished? What's changed?
Again, I have not made a decision, but I think it's important that if, in fact, we make a choice to have repercussions for the use of chemical weapons, then the Assad regime, which is involved in a civil war, trying to protect itself, will have received a pretty strong signal that, in fact, it better not do it again. And that doesn't solve all the problems inside of Syria. And it doesn't obviously end the death of innocent civilians inside of Syria. And we hope that, in fact, ultimately a political transition can take place inside of Syria. And we're prepared to work with anybody, the Russians and others, to try to bring the parties together to resolve the conflict. But we want the Assad regime to understand that by using chemical weapons on a large scale against your own people, against women, against infants, against children, that you are not only breaking international norms and standards of decency, but you're also creating a situation where U.S. national interests are affected, and that needs to stop.